Jasmine hunched over her calculus textbook, the only black face in a sea of white at Westwood Academy. Isolation had become her daily uniform, as familiar as her second-hand blazer. The classroom door swung open. Principal Winters entered with a woman in a stained cafeteria apron. "Due to Mr. Reynolds' leave, Ms. Williams will be teaching until a proper replacement arrives," he announced, emphasizing proper like an apology. "The lunch lady? Seriously?" Blake Thompson snickered, triggering a wave of laughter. Chalk dust stung Jasmine's nostrils as it mixed with the cafeteria smell clinging to Lucia Williams' uniform. The woman stood silent, face unreadable. Little did they know that the woman they dismissed as just the lunch lady had once been the youngest Fields Medal nominee in mathematics history. Before a scandal buried her name and stole her future, mornings at Westwood Academy followed a predictable rhythm for Jasmine. Arrive early to avoid the sneers in the hallway. Keep her scholarship status a secret, though everyone somehow knew. Pretend not to notice when her lab partners forgot to include her name on group projects, or when teachers called on everyone but her, despite her raised hand. At 12 years old, she was the youngest student in advanced placement, which only added to her isolation. The other students, most from families that vacationed in the Hamptons or owned summer homes in Martha's Vineyard, made sure she never forgot she didn't belong. Her mother had taken on an extra shift at the hospital to afford the second-hand uniform Jasmine wore like armor, its slightly faded blue blazer a constant reminder of the economic divide between her and her classmates. Each morning, Jasmine traced the same path through the immaculate grounds, past the Olympic-sized swimming pool her scholarship didn't allow her to use, and through the marble-floored entrance hall where portraits of distinguished alumni, none of whom looked like her, stared down with painted indifference. 4 miles away, in a small apartment with peeling wallpaper and temperamental plumbing, Lucia Williams had already been awake for 3 hours. Her day began at 4 a.m., prep work at the bakery downtown, then to Westwood's cafeteria by 10, followed by evening classes at the community college, where she was slowly accumulating credits toward a degree most had written off as impossible for her. Between shifts, she visited her mother at Pinecrest Care Center, where Alzheimer's was slowly erasing the brilliant woman who had once taught literature at Howard University before a stroke had derailed her career. Lucia absently touched the small brass compass in her pocket as she chopped onions for the day's soup. The familiar action centered her when memories threatened to pull her under. Her father had given it to her when she was accepted to MIT at 16, to help you find your way when the path disappears. Its weight against her palm still gave her courage, even after all these years of detours and dead ends. In class that afternoon, Jasmine struggled with a theorem proof on the board. Mr. Peterson, the mathematics department head temporarily covering the class, watched with thinly veiled impatience, his silver-rimmed glasses magnifying the disdain in his eyes. "Perhaps advanced calculus is a bit ambitious for some students," he said, eyes flicking meaningfully toward Jasmine. The comment landed like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral, a skill perfected over months of similar moments. Blake Thompson, with his custom laptop and private tutor, smirked from the front row. "Maybe she should try regular math first." The comment earned him appreciative chuckles from his entourage, their collective confidence built on foundations of privilege Jasmine couldn't begin to imagine. Later, in the cafeteria, Jasmine pushed food around her plate, the equations still swimming in her head along with Peterson's dismissive words. The constant effort of proving herself worthy of space was exhausting. She barely noticed when Lucia served her lunch, until a napkin appeared beside her tray with elegant handwriting covering one corner. Try approaching it from the inverse. The solution path becomes clearer when viewed through transformation rather than direct proof. Jasmine stared at the napkin, then at Lucia, who had already moved down the line, ladling mac and cheese onto another student's tray with practiced efficiency. The method was elegant, unexpected, nothing like what Peterson had shown them. It demonstrated an understanding of mathematical principles that went beyond textbook applications. That evening, Jasmine incorporated the approach into her homework, working by the dim light of her desk lamp long after her mother had fallen asleep on the couch, still in her nursing scrubs. The solution unfolded with surprising grace once she followed the napkin's suggestion. The next day, when Peterson called for solutions, she raised her hand for the first time in weeks. Behind the serving counter, Lucia deftly slipped extra portions to kids whose trays looked too empty, using her body to shield the movement from Mrs. Grady's eagle-eyed supervision, a daily sleight of hand that left skinny freshmen grinning with gratitude. The faculty lounge hummed with excitement as Mr. Peterson posted flyers for the state mathematics championship. The glossy paper featured images of past winners, predominantly white males, holding gleaming trophies. The winner would receive a full scholarship to any state university. A golden ticket that made Jasmine's heart race when she glimpsed it through the door while delivering a message from her English teacher. "We need our best students prepared," Principal Winters said, tapping the poster with manicured fingernails. "With Reynolds out, who's coaching our team? We can't afford to lose our 5-year winning streak." "I've already begun preliminary work with Blake Thompson," Peterson replied, straightening his bow tie with practiced precision. "The boy's a natural. With proper guidance, he'll maintain Westwood's reputation." Lucia entered with a cart of coffee, invisible until she wasn't. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to navigating spaces where she was an afterthought. She paused, coffee pot in hand, her eyes briefly lingering on the championship flyer. "I could help with the preparation," she offered quietly. "I have some background in competitive mathematics from—" "She's just the lunch lady. Probably doesn't know algebra from applesauce," Peterson interrupted, not bothering to lower his voice. Laughter rippled through the room like a cold current. "Next, the janitor will want to coach the debate team." Principal Winters looked uncomfortable but shrugged. "Ms. Williams, your assistance is appreciated, but this requires specialized knowledge. You can cover basic classes until our new teacher arrives in 2 weeks. Just follow the textbook closely, please." Lucia poured coffee for Peterson, who didn't look up from his papers. The bitter taste burned her tongue as she swallowed her pride along with it. 15 years of swallowing such moments had left a permanent knot in her throat. After the teachers dispersed, Blake's father, Mr. Thompson, cornered the principal in the hallway. Lucia pretended to wipe down tables nearby, the familiar invisibility of service work allowing her to eavesdrop without raising suspicion. "Winters, you can't be serious about letting cafeteria staff teach my son," Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of donations and influence. "The board has standards. What will the other parents say when they hear their children are being taught by someone who serves lunch?" "It's temporary, Gerald. Just until—" 2 weeks is too long. These are critical preparation periods for the championship. Peterson should take over all advanced classes immediately. My son's future isn't something to gamble with on some misguided attempt at— What? Giving everyone a chance? This isn't a charity, it's an elite institution. Principal Winters nodded, capitulating with barely a token resistance. "Of course, Gerald. I'll make the arrangements this afternoon." Lucia finished her rounds, her movements mechanical as she cleared away cups and napkins. Each one represented a conversation she wasn't meant to be part of, decisions made in rooms she could only enter to clean. As she walked away, she quietly pocketed the competition flyer, the same competition where, 15 years ago, her groundbreaking proof had been stolen by the man now running Westwood's math department. The classroom fell silent when Lucia walked in without her hairnet, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized her high cheekbones and determined jaw. She wore a simple blouse and slacks instead of her uniform, clothes that weren't fancy but were unmistakably not cafeteria issue. The transformation was subtle but significant, like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis that most had mistaken for a stone. "Good morning," she said, picking up the chalk with quiet confidence. "Today we'll explore the relationship between differential equations and physical systems, how mathematics helps us describe the world in motion." Blake raised his hand immediately, not waiting to be called on. "Aren't you supposed to, follow Mr. Reynolds' lesson plan or something? My dad says you're just temporary." Several students snickered, the sound familiar to both Lucia and Jasmine in different ways. "Mr. Reynolds' plan was excellent for getting you through standardized tests," Lucia replied evenly, neither defensive nor apologetic. "Mine will help you understand why mathematics matters beyond exam scores. When you can see the beauty in equations, they cease being homework and become a language for describing everything from planetary orbits to population growth." For the next hour, she transformed the sterile classroom into a workshop of ideas. Equations flowed across the board in her precise handwriting, each concept building on the last with an elegance that made even the most abstract ideas seem suddenly obvious. The satisfying click of chalk against board punctuated her explanations, each stroke revealing years of hidden mastery. Unlike Peterson's rigid recitation of textbook principles, Lucia moved between examples with the fluid grace of someone who didn't just know the rules, but understood why they existed. "The derivative isn't just a calculation," she explained, drawing a curve that somehow reminded Jasmine of a bird in flight. "It's a way of capturing change at a precise moment, like freezing time to examine how something is transforming." When the bell rang, students filed out in stunned silence. Many looked confused, as if they'd witnessed something they couldn't quite categorize. Only Jasmine lingered, watching Lucia erase the board with methodical strokes that seemed to hold a quiet reverence for the knowledge being temporarily removed. "That wasn't from any textbook," Jasmine said finally, breaking the silence. Lucia paused, chalk dust swirling in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "No. Where did you learn to teach like that?" A small smile played at the corner of Lucia's mouth. "Where did you learn to solve proofs the way you did yesterday?" The question hung between them, an invitation and a challenge wrapped into one. Jasmine recognized it as the first time a teacher at Westwood had acknowledged her capability rather than her difference. After that, they fell into an unspoken routine. Jasmine would stay after class, ostensibly to clarify homework questions, and Lucia would share techniques that made the girls' eyes widen with comprehension. They worked through problems together, Lucia guiding rather than instructing, asking questions that led Jasmine to discover solutions herself. When Jasmine mentioned the mathematics championship one afternoon, Lucia hesitated only briefly before offering to help her prepare. The competition represented different kinds of redemption for each of them. For Jasmine, a chance to prove her belonging. For Lucia, something deeper she wasn't yet ready to name. "Mr. Peterson wouldn't approve," Jasmine noted, erasing a failed attempt at a complex proof. "Then we keep it between us," Lucia replied, something hard flickering behind her eyes like steel catching light. During their third after-school session, Jasmine finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since that first napkin appeared on her lunch tray. "You're too good to be just a lunch lady. What happened?" Lucia turned away, absently touching the compass in her pocket, a gesture Jasmine had noticed occurred whenever difficult topics arose. "I had a mentor once, someone I trusted completely. He took my work, published it as his own. By the time I gathered the courage to challenge him, my reputation was already destroyed. In academia, once you're labeled a fraud, doors don't just close, they vanish." "That's not fair," Jasmine said fiercely, her young face flushed with indignation on Lucia's behalf. "Life rarely is," Lucia replied with a sad smile. "But mathematics is. In math, there's always an elegant truth waiting to be discovered, regardless of who finds it. Numbers don't care about your background or who your parents are." As the days passed, Jasmine's confidence grew under Lucia's guidance, her hand rising more frequently in class, her solutions becoming more elegant. But with visibility came attention, not all of it welcome. Blake and his friends had begun following her through hallways, whispering, "Charity case," just loud enough to hear. When they knocked her books from her hands one afternoon, sending papers scattering across the polished floor, an elderly librarian appeared seemingly from nowhere. "That's enough," she said sharply, her small frame somehow imposing despite her age. "Unless you'd like to discuss your behavior with Principal Winters." The boys scattered like startled birds. The woman, Mrs. Chen according to her name badge, helped Jasmine gather her books, her movements spry despite her 70-plus years. "Thank you," Jasmine mumbled, embarrassed to have been rescued like a child. "Don't thank me," Mrs. Chen replied with a knowing smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "But do tell Lucia that her old teacher says hello." She pressed a finger to her lips and winked, the gesture both conspiratorial and reassuring. That evening, in an empty classroom with the door locked, Lucia introduced Jasmine to her former teacher and mentor. Mrs. Chen had taught mathematics at Westwood for 30 years before retiring to the library, and she remembered a brilliant young Lucia who had once been her star pupil. "She was going to change the world," Mrs. Chen said, eyes crinkling with affection. "Still might, if the world ever gets wise enough to let her." With Mrs. Chen providing lookout and occasional alibis, their training intensified. Lucia began showing Jasmine approaches to problems that made traditional methods seem clumsy by comparison. She explained complex concepts using cafeteria analogies, comparing differential equations to recipes that needed precise timing and ingredients, making the students both hungry and enlightened. "When you integrate, you're just finding all the slices of pizza that make up the whole pie," she explained once, making Jasmine laugh for the first time in weeks. "Each slice is a small piece of area, but add them all together and you get the complete picture." The impromptu study group expanded cautiously to include 2 other students who showed genuine interest. Marcus, a quiet boy who struggled with timed tests, but possessed remarkable geometric intuition, and Zoe, whose parents' expectations of perfection had extinguished her natural curiosity until Lucia's teaching began to rekindle it. When Lucia demonstrated her revolutionary approach to the Riemann hypothesis, Jasmine gasped, "That's the exact same method Peterson published in his famous paper. The one that made his career." The classroom door crashed open mid-equation, the bang reverberating through the room like a gunshot. Mr. Peterson stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway lights, eyes narrowing as he took in the advanced formulas covering the board. Formulas far beyond the standard curriculum, formulas that looked eerily familiar to him. Behind him, Principal Winters and Mr. Thompson wore matching expressions of disapproval, a united front of institutional authority. "What is the meaning of this?" Peterson demanded, striding forward to examine Lucia's work. His finger traced an equation, recognition and alarm flashing across his features. "These concepts are far beyond the approved curriculum. This is completely inappropriate for students at this level." Marcus and Zoe shrank in their seats, but Jasmine remained upright, her shoulders squared despite the hammering of her heart. "The students were keeping up just fine," Lucia replied, her voice steady despite the chalk trembling slightly in her fingers. For a moment, Jasmine glimpsed the young mathematician she must have been before the world conspired to silence her. Brilliant, confident, uncompromising. "Ms. Williams, we've received concerns about your teaching methods," Principal Winters said, not quite meeting her eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder. "The board has called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation." "Effective immediately, you are relieved of classroom duties," Thompson added, the satisfaction in his voice barely concealed beneath a veneer of professional concern. "Peterson will take over all mathematics classes pending the board's decision." Jasmine followed them to the administration building, slipping into the back of the conference room unnoticed as teachers and board members filed in. The suffocating weight of the air conditioning pressed down, cold and artificial like the justice being dispensed. Oak paneling and leather chairs spoke of traditions established long before anyone in the room had considered that someone like Lucia or Jasmine might someday belong there. "The question before us is simple," Mr. Thompson began, standing at the head of the table with the easy authority of someone who had never had his right to speak questioned. "Has an unqualified cafeteria worker been exceeding her authority by teaching unauthorized material to our students?" Lucia sat alone at the far end of the table, her posture straight, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. In her simple clothes against the backdrop of academic regalia and expensive suits, she looked isolated, exactly as intended. "I was asked to cover classes," Lucia said, her voice clear despite its softness. "I've been teaching mathematics, not merely assigning textbook problems but helping students understand the underlying principles." "Without credentials," Peterson interjected, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, "Ms. Williams has no verifiable academic background that qualifies her for this position. For all we know, she could be filling these children's heads with mathematical nonsense." Mrs. Chen raised her hand, her age and decades of service granting her a respect few others in the room commanded. "If I may, I've observed Ms. Williams's teaching. Her methods are unorthodox but effective. The students are engaged and learning at an accelerated pace. Several who were previously struggling have shown marked improvement. With all due respect, Mrs. Chen, you're a librarian now, not faculty." Thompson dismissed her with a wave that suggested her opinion had been tolerated rather than valued. "Peterson here is our mathematics department head. His assessment carries more weight in this matter. And my assessment is that allowing a lunch lady to experiment with our children's education is irresponsible," Peterson said, adjusting his glasses with practiced precision. "Especially with the state championship approaching. We cannot risk our reputation on some misguided social experiment." The phrase lunch lady rippled through the room, carrying with it all the unspoken prejudices and assumptions. Jasmine watched as Lucia absorbed the blow without flinching, her face a careful mask. Principal Winters nodded, relief evident on his face at having a decision made for him. "I think it's best if Mr. Peterson takes over the classes immediately. Ms. Williams can return to her regular duties in the cafeteria." "You mean serving food," Lucia said flatly, naming the subtext that hung in the air. "Where your expertise is not in question," Thompson replied with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jasmine slipped out before anyone noticed her, racing to the library where she knew she could access the school's archives. Something about Peterson's reaction to Lucia's methods had triggered a memory, a display case of academic achievements near the front office, featuring alumni publications. Peterson's paper on advanced number theory was prominently displayed, its framed cover yellowing slightly with age. It took her nearly an hour of searching through digital archives before she found it. Peterson's landmark paper on number theory, published 15 years ago. The paper that had launched his career and earned him tenure at the university before he'd moved to Westwood to shape young minds. She compared his methods with the notes she'd taken during Lucia's lessons, her stomach sinking as the pattern became clear. They were identical, not similar, not derivative, but exactly the same approach Lucia had shown her last week. The transformation technique that had seemed so elegant and original was there on the page, credited to Dr. Harold Peterson. But something about the paper felt oddly familiar, as if it had been written by two different hands. When she confronted Lucia with her discovery that evening, finding her in the empty cafeteria preparing for the next day, the lunch lady's shoulders sagged as if a weight she'd been carrying for years had suddenly doubled. "I was 20 years old," Lucia said quietly, leaning against the industrial sink. "A prodigy, they called me. First in my family to go to college, on a full scholarship to MIT. Peterson was my doctoral advisor. I trusted him with my breakthrough work on the night before the competition, seeking his guidance, his approval. I wanted him to be proud. He stole it? Published it 3 months later under his name. By then, I'd been disgraced for cheating at the championship when I used my own method, the same method he claimed I must have stolen from his unpublished research." Her bitter laugh held no humor. "The timing was perfect. No one believed the black girl from the projects over the respected white professor with tenure." "That's why you're here? Working in a school cafeteria?" Jasmine couldn't keep the horror from her voice. "No one would hire me after the scandal. No university would touch me. I took what jobs I could find," Lucia said, straightening up with dignity that transcended her surroundings. "When I saw the posting at Westwood, I knew he worked here. I don't know what I thought, that maybe after 15 years, I could reclaim some small piece of my dream." "We have to expose him," Jasmine insisted, the injustice burning in her chest like a physical pain. "With what proof? My word against his? That didn't work 15 years ago. It won't work now." Lucia turned back to her prep work, the resignation in her voice worse than anger would have been. The competition was only 2 weeks away. Jasmine knew that winning wouldn't just secure her future. It could be Lucia's only chance at redemption. But Peterson would be watching her now, suspicious of any technique that resembled his work. As Peterson smirked in victory, Lucia slid her brass compass across the table to Jasmine with a whisper. "Meet me at midnight. I'm going to teach you how to win this competition and expose him. But if we're caught, we both lose everything." The industrial kitchen was a different place at night. Hulking metal appliances cast long shadows in the glow of a single light over the prep station. Jasmine's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she slipped through the delivery entrance, using the key Lucia had hidden for her beneath a loose brick in the garden bed. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," Lucia said, emerging from the darkness near the walk-in freezer. In the dim light, she looked younger, the weight of daytime indignities temporarily lifted from her shoulders. "I had to wait until my mom left for night shift," Jasmine explained, setting her backpack on the counter. The rough texture of the well-worn kitchen countertop under her fingers felt different in the dark, the surface holding years of stories much like the equations they were trying to solve. "She thinks I'm asleep. If she knew I was sneaking out..." "She'd be right to worry," Lucia acknowledged. "But sometimes the proper path isn't the one that leads to justice." Their midnight sessions quickly established a rhythm. Lucia would present a problem, and Jasmine would work through it while Lucia prepared the next day's bread dough. The quiet hum of refrigerators and the methodical kneading created a strange harmony that felt safer than the classroom ever had. Sometimes Mrs. Chen would join them, bringing photocopies of advanced texts from the university library where her late husband had been a professor. "The key to winning isn't just solving the problem," Lucia explained on their third night, watching Jasmine struggle with a particularly elegant but challenging proof. "It's understanding why the problem matters, seeing the connections between what appears to be abstract and how it shapes our understanding of the world." Jasmine's pencil hovered uncertainly over her notebook. "I don't see the path here. It's like hitting a wall." "Math isn't about seeing the path," Lucia said, dusting flour from her hands and coming to stand beside Jasmine. "It's about creating one. When I was your age, I would imagine numbers as stars, each one a fixed point with infinite possible constellations waiting to be drawn between them. Our job isn't to find the one right answer, it's to discover the most beautiful connection." Despite their caution, Peterson began to suspect something. He started appearing unexpectedly during Jasmine's lunch period, watching her with narrowed eyes that missed nothing. He assigned surprise tests in class, clearly hoping to catch her unprepared. When she continued to excel, his scrutiny intensified. "He's watching me," Jasmine whispered to Lucia during a brief moment at the lunch line, her tray extended for a scoop of mashed potatoes. "Yesterday, he accidentally dropped my test paper on the floor, then claimed I hadn't turned one in." "Then we need to be more careful," Lucia replied, sliding an extra roll onto Jasmine's tray along with a napkin containing the night's meeting time. "Mrs. Chen will create a diversion if necessary." Mrs. Chen became their most valuable ally, providing lookout and occasionally joining their sessions to share insights from her decades of teaching. With her silver hair and grandmotherly appearance, no one questioned her presence in the library at odd hours or her friendship with the lunch lady. But even with her help, the risks grew. Lucia had already received a warning about unauthorized use of school facilities after hours. One more infraction could cost her the job she desperately needed to pay for her mother's care. The situation grew more complex when Blake Thompson cornered Jasmine after class one day, his usual entourage conspicuously absent. "You should drop out of the competition," he said, leaning against her locker with practiced casualness that didn't quite mask the tension in his shoulders. "Why would I do that?" Jasmine kept her voice neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Because you can't win," he replied simply, as if stating an obvious fact like the color of the sky. "And my father doesn't like embarrassments associated with Westwood, especially from scholarship cases." There was something in his tone, not the usual contempt, but something closer to warning. His eyes darted down the hallway, checking if they were being observed. "Thanks for the advice." Jasmine pushed past him, but his words lingered like a bad smell, impossible to ignore completely. That night, she arrived at the kitchen to find Lucia on the phone, her face tight with worry, one hand gripping the edge of the stainless steel counter so hard her knuckles had gone white. "I'll find a way to pay for the additional care," she was saying, her voice steady despite the strain evident in every line of her body. "Just don't move her to the state facility. Please, give me until the end of the month." After she hung up, Lucia explained that her mother's condition had worsened. The care center needed more money for specialized treatment, or they would transfer her to a state-run nursing home where she would be just another patient in an overcrowded system, her specific needs lost in the shuffle of institutional care. "We should stop," Jasmine said, suddenly feeling very young and very selfish for risking Lucia's livelihood. "You can't risk your job. Your mom needs you." "My mother was the one who encouraged me to pursue mathematics when everyone said little black girls should focus on more practical subjects," Lucia replied, her voice steady despite the moisture in her eyes. "She worked 2 jobs to buy me my first graphing calculator. She's the one who stayed up with me all night when I was stuck on a problem, not because she understood the math, but because she understood how much it mattered to me. She would never forgive me if I gave up now." The statement hung in the air between them, its weight and truth undeniable. From that moment, their midnight sessions took on a new urgency. They doubled down on their preparations, working through increasingly complex problems that Peterson might use to trip up Jasmine in the competition. Mrs. Chen discovered archived copies of Lucia's original undergraduate work in the university library system, papers published before Peterson's theft that showed the evolution of her unique approach. The methodology was clearly hers, developed over years of study, not something that could have sprung fully formed from Peterson's mind as he claimed. But without access to Peterson's original manuscript submission dates and the correspondence that would have shown he had seen Lucia's work before publishing, they couldn't prove the theft definitively. As the competition week arrived, the pressure intensified. Jasmine spent every free moment practicing while evading Peterson's increasingly suspicious monitoring. Twice, she nearly collided with him in the hallway, where he seemed to be lying in wait for her. Lucia worked between her shifts, exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes as she juggled her various jobs and her mother's care with their secret training. During one particularly late session, when tension had made them both irritable and error-prone, Lucia suddenly shifted gears. She pulled out the next day's menu plan and began teaching probability using the unpredictable nature of the school's mystery meat selection, arranging daily menu items in a complex pattern that had Jasmine giggling despite her exhaustion. "If Monday is meatloaf and Wednesday is always chicken surprise, what's the statistical likelihood of Thursday being edible?" Lucia asked with exaggerated seriousness, creating an impromptu probability table that somehow perfectly illustrated the concept they'd been struggling with. The laughter was a brief respite from their mounting tension, a reminder that even in serious matters, joy could be found. The night before the competition, Jasmine stayed late at school, reviewing formulas in the empty library until the custodian gently reminded her that he needed to lock up. As she headed for the exit, a familiar figure stepped out from a classroom doorway, blocking her path. "Miss Lewis, out rather late, aren't we?" Peterson's voice echoed in the empty hallway, each word precisely enunciated like chalk tapping on a board. "I was studying," she said, clutching her notebook tighter. "I'm sure you were." He moved closer, towering over her. The fluorescent lights caught his glasses, turning them into blank white discs that obscured his eyes. "I know what you and the lunch lady are planning, and I've made sure you'll never finish that proof on stage, unless you're willing to make a deal." The state mathematics championship buzzed with nervous energy. Folding tables lined the university auditorium, each station equipped with a chalkboard, scratch paper, and a single white piece of chalk. Camera crews circulated, setting up for the live stream that would broadcast to schools across the state. an event that had grown in prestige as STEM education gained national attention. Jasmine's hands trembled slightly as she took her assigned seat, adjusting the board so the audience could better see her work. Peterson's threat from the previous night still rang in her ears. Drop out or face a problem she couldn't possibly solve. The implied alternative hung between his words. If she withdrew her application, her scholarship at Westwood would remain secure. When she'd refused, the cold certainty in his eyes told her he wasn't bluffing. "I've been writing these championship problems for 15 years, he'd said with chilling confidence. "Trust me when I say no one will find it suspicious when you fail." Lucia wasn't allowed backstage with the other coaches, her lack of official credentials keeping her in the audience. But Jasmine could see her in the third row, sitting beside Mrs. Chen, the brass compass now in Jasmine's pocket instead of its usual place in Lucia's. Its weight felt both reassuring and burdensome, a physical reminder of everything at stake. "Welcome to the 43rd Annual State Mathematics Championship," announced the moderator, a silver-haired woman from the university's mathematics department. "Today's competitors will face 3 increasingly difficult challenges, with the final problem worth 60% of the total score. Remember, our judges are looking not just for correct answers, but for elegant, insightful approaches." The first 2 problems were manageable. Challenging, but within the scope of what Jasmine had prepared for. One involved a complex integration that yielded to the substitution method. The other required a clever application of combinatorial principles. She completed them with 15 minutes to spare, allowing herself a small surge of confidence. Blake, at a table nearby, seemed to be struggling with the second problem, erasing and rewriting repeatedly, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. Then came the final challenge. "For your championship problem," the moderator announced, "you will need to find an elegant proof for the convergence pattern in this sequence." The problem appeared on the main screen, and Jasmine's heart sank. It was nothing like what they had practiced. A deliberately obscure variation that seemed designed specifically to counter the approaches Lucia had taught her. The sequence contained a recursive element that made standard convergence tests inapplicable, with a pattern that seemed to oscillate unpredictably before settling toward a limit. From the corner of her eye, she could see Peterson standing near the judge's table, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd done exactly what he threatened. Ensured she would face a problem that her preparation wouldn't cover. The message was clear. This is what happens when you challenge the established order. For 20 minutes, Jasmine tried conventional approaches, each one leading to a dead end. Her chalk moved more slowly with each attempt, desperation mounting as the timer on the wall counted mercilessly downward. The deafening silence in the auditorium was broken only by the scratching of chalk across boards and the occasional cough or shuffle from the audience. She glanced at the other competitors. Most were deep in concentration, though a few showed signs of the same frustration she felt. Blake seemed to have recovered from his earlier struggle and was writing with renewed confidence, filling his board with equations. 55 minutes into the hour allotted, Jasmine was ready to give up. Her chalkboard remained mostly empty, failed attempts erased into ghostly smudges that seemed to mock her efforts. The pressure of hundreds of eyes watching her struggle made her hand shake slightly as she set down her chalk. Almost unconsciously, she slipped her hand into her pocket, fingers closing around Lucia's compass. The metal was warm from being carried so close to her body all day. She opened it, watching the needle swing toward magnetic north with unwavering certainty. A memory surfaced, Lucia's voice during one of their midnight sessions. "Mathematics isn't just about finding the right answer. It's about finding the most elegant path to truth. When you're lost, sometimes you need to completely reorient yourself rather than forcing the familiar path." Jasmine stared at the compass, then back at the problem. Path, direction, orientation. The sequence wasn't behaving because she was approaching it from the wrong direction, trying to force it into a familiar pattern rather than seeing what it actually was. She suddenly understood what Lucia had been teaching her all along. It wasn't about memorizing methods. It was about seeing the underlying patterns that connected all mathematical truths. What if the sequence wasn't converging in the traditional sense? What if its pattern was revealing something else entirely? With 8 minutes remaining, Jasmine picked up her chalk and began writing. She approached the problem from a completely different angle, using the revolutionary method that had first brought Lucia recognition 15 years ago, but with a crucial adaptation. Instead of trying to prove convergence directly, she transformed the sequence into a geometric representation that revealed a hidden pattern in its oscillation. The deafening silence in the auditorium was broken only by the scratching of Jasmine's chalk, each stroke echoing like a heartbeat. 3 minutes before time expired, she drew a final line under her solution and stepped back, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "Time!" called the moderator as the final second ticked away. "Please step away from your boards." The judges conferred in hushed voices as they reviewed each contestant's work. Jasmine could see Peterson leaning in, pointing urgently at her board while whispering to one of the judges, his expression growing increasingly agitated as the judge shook her head. "We have a verification issue with one submission," the head judge announced finally, adjusting her glasses as she consulted her notes. "Contestant 14, please explain your methodology." Jasmine approached the microphone, aware of every eye on her. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice, when it came, was clear and confident. "I used a transformation approach that reveals the underlying pattern by inverting the traditional convergence test," she explained, pointing to her board. "By mapping the sequence to a geometric space, we can see that what appears to be oscillation is actually rotation around a fixed point, which proves convergence to the limit I've identified." Peterson stepped forward, his face flushed. "That method is invalid for this application. It doesn't appear in any standard textbook or established literature." "Because it's not from a textbook," Jasmine replied, her voice gaining strength with each word. "It's the Williams method, developed by Lucia Williams 15 years ago." A murmur ran through the audience, heads turning toward Lucia, who sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "That's impossible," Peterson said dismissively, though a slight tremor had entered his voice. "I developed that approach myself. It's well documented in my published work." "Did you?" Mrs. Chen had risen from her seat, a manila folder in her hand. The small woman commanded attention as she walked toward the judges' table with slow, deliberate steps. "I have here Lucia Williams's undergraduate thesis from MIT, dated 3 years before your famous paper. The method is described in detail, a method you claimed as your own after serving as her doctoral advisor." As camera phones turned toward the confrontation, Mrs. Chen walked forward and handed the folder to the head judge. "You'll also find a letter from Dr. Harrison at MIT confirming the date of submission and the originality of the work, and correspondence between Ms. Williams and Dr. Peterson where she clearly describes her methodology before his paper was ever submitted." Peterson's face had drained of color. "This is absurd. The girl is clearly cheating, using an approach her lunch lady coach fed her." "It's not cheating to use established mathematical principles," Jasmine countered, finding strength in the truth of her words. "Unless you're claiming that your published work is invalid." The live stream cameras swung toward Peterson, whose composure was visibly crumbling as the judges examined Mrs. Chen's documents. On screens throughout the auditorium, viewers could see his expression shifting from confidence to panic. "The methodology appears sound," the head judge announced after a tense minute. "The proof is elegant and valid. Contestant 14 has provided the most efficient solution." As the video of Peterson's academic theft went viral in real time, the chairman of the field's medal committee rose from the audience, eyes fixed on Lucia. "Ms. Williams, I believe we have 15 years of recognition to restore to you." Camera flashes illuminated the stage as Jasmine accepted the championship trophy, her hands still chalky from the board. The weight of it surprised her, both heavier and lighter than she had imagined. The university president stood nearby, her expression a mixture of delight and damage control as reporters shouted questions about Peterson's academic fraud rather than focusing on the competition itself. Westwood Academy is launching a full investigation, Principal Winters announced from the edge of the stage, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief as microphones were thrust toward him. We take academic integrity very seriously and will cooperate fully with the university's ethics committee. Mr. Thompson, who had been conspicuously trying to distance himself from Peterson since the revelations began, stepped forward with the practiced smile of a man accustomed to reshaping narratives. The board fully supports this investigation and will cooperate with all relevant authorities. Academic honesty is a cornerstone of Westwood's philosophy. The words rang hollow in light of his earlier dismissal of Lucia, but the cameras captured his statement without irony, another powerful man controlling the story through sheer force of confidence. Peterson had been quietly escorted from the auditorium after attempting to claim that Lucia had stolen the method from him during her time as his student, a timeline that Mrs. Chen's documents had immediately disproven. His desperate backpedaling had only dug him deeper, each explanation contradicting the last until he finally fell silent, the weight of 15 years of deception finally collapsing around him. In the hallway outside, Jasmine found Lucia surrounded by mathematics professors and academic journal editors, all eager to discuss the implications of her work. The warm weight of tears slid down Lucia's cheeks as she finally heard her name associated with her work, the salt of vindication after years of bitterness. "You did this," Lucia said when she spotted Jasmine, pulling her into a tight hug that smelled of chalk and courage. "You stood up when I couldn't." "We did it together," Jasmine replied, pressing the brass compass back into Lucia's hand. "This belongs with you. It led us both home." The story exploded beyond the academic community. By evening, Just the Lunch Lady was trending on social media, with thousands sharing stories of underestimated women in STEM fields. 3 major universities had already reached out to Lucia with teaching offers, and a prominent mathematical journal was rushing to publish a retrospective on her original work that had influenced an entire generation of mathematicians, even if through Peterson's stolen publication. Later that evening, as the auditorium emptied and the cleaning crew began dismantling the competition setup, Blake Thompson approached Jasmine with an awkward shuffle, hands thrust deep in his pockets. "That was pretty cool what you did up there," he mumbled, not quite meeting her eyes. "Which part? The math or exposing your dad's favorite teacher as a fraud?" Jasmine's voice held an edge she wouldn't have dared use weeks earlier. Blake winced. "Look, I didn't know about any of that stuff with Miss Williams. I just wanted to say, your proof was better than mine, and I had private tutors and everything." It wasn't quite an apology, but Jasmine recognized it as the closest thing to respect she'd received from any of her classmates. The acknowledgement felt significant, a small crack in the foundation of assumptions that had defined her experience at Westwood. "You're actually not bad at math when you're not busy being a jerk," she replied, offering a tentative olive branch. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yeah, well, maybe I've been focusing on the wrong things." The school board called an emergency session the following day, with Mr. Thompson now leading the charge to establish new diversity initiatives, a transparent attempt to get ahead of the public relations disaster. Still, Jasmine couldn't help but feel satisfaction watching him announce increased scholarship funding for underrepresented students at Westwood and a new mentorship program designed to support them. "Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places," Mrs. Chen remarked, sitting beside Jasmine during the press conference. "And sometimes it takes a child to speak the truth adults are too afraid to acknowledge." And a week later, the university's ethics committee completed its preliminary investigation. Peterson was placed on administrative leave pending a full review of all his published work. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the theft of Lucia's method, but a pattern of appropriating ideas from vulnerable students throughout his career. Former graduate students began coming forward with their own stories, each one adding to the picture of a man who had built his reputation on stolen brilliance. The hearing was held in the same auditorium where the competition had taken place. This time, Lucia stood at the center, 15 years of evidence supporting her case. The mathematics community had rallied around her, with former colleagues coming forward with their own stories of Peterson's academic theft. "The pattern is clear," said the committee chair, a distinguished professor whose own work had been influenced by what she had believed was Peterson's innovation. "This represents one of the most egregious cases of academic misconduct this university has encountered." When it was Peterson's turn to speak, he attempted one last desperate defense, claiming collaborative credit for guiding Lucia's work. "If we examine the fundamental principles," he began, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers, "you'll see my influence clearly in the development of the methodology. As her advisor, I naturally—" "The Williams method requires no additional attribution," interrupted the committee chair, her voice firm. "The evidence shows unequivocally that this work originated with Ms. Williams alone. Your contribution appears to have been limited to removing her name and replacing it with your own." With cameras rolling and the academic world watching, Peterson was forced to say the words he'd refused to speak 15 years ago. "The Williams method revolutionizes our understanding of mathematics, and I am not its author." 6 months later, the Westwood Academy mathematics classroom looked nothing like it had before. Gone were the rigid rows of desks and the sterile whiteboard. Instead, workstations clustered in collaborative groups, and the walls displayed student projects connecting mathematical concepts to real-world applications. Equations blossomed alongside art pieces that interpreted mathematical principles through color and form. Jasmine now attended Westwood on the newly established Williams Scholarship for Excellence in Mathematics, the first of its kind, created specifically for students from underrepresented backgrounds with aptitude for advanced mathematical thinking. The funding covered not just tuition, but also materials, special programs, and mentorship opportunities that recognized brilliance came in many forms and from many places. Lucia had accepted a visiting professorship at the State University while simultaneously completing her long-delayed PhD. Her paper on the original Williams method had been republished with proper attribution, sparking renewed interest in her approach. The brass compass that had once been her secret talisman now sat in a glass display case in the mathematics department lobby, with a simple inscription, "For those who navigate by truth." The story had sparked necessary conversations across academia about who gets credited and why, leading several major journals to revise their peer review processes to better protect vulnerable contributors. Peterson's other victims had received formal apologies, with committees working to properly attribute their contributions where possible. Twice a week, Lucia returned to Westwood to lead an advanced seminar. Today, she was demonstrating a complex application of the Williams method while Jasmine assisted, passing out materials to eager students whose faces reflected a diversity previously absent from advanced classes. "Notice how the transformation reveals the underlying pattern," Lucia explained, her chalk moving confidently across the board. "Just like in the cafeteria, when you understand the ingredients, you can predict how they'll come together. The mathematics of combinations applies as much to soup as it does to quantum physics." The class chuckled. Lucia's tendency to slip into food analogies when explaining complex math had become a beloved trademark, now to the delight of her university students as well. What had once been used to diminish her, just the lunch lady, had been reclaimed as a teaching tool that made abstract concepts tangible. In the back row, Blake Thompson was actually taking notes instead of scrolling through his phone. The public downfall of his father's influence had been accompanied by a surprising shift in Blake himself. The automatic privilege he'd always assumed had been replaced by something approaching humility. He and Jasmine weren't exactly friends, but they had developed a cautious respect that occasionally resembled camaraderie during study sessions. After class, Jasmine visited Pinecrest Care Center with Lucia. The facility was still modest, but Lucia's improved circumstances had secured her mother a private room with better care and more attentive staff. Though Mrs. Williams rarely recognized her daughter anymore, today was a good day. Her eyes brightened when Lucia entered, a flash of recognition illuminating her face. "You're teaching again," she said, patting Lucia's hand with gnarled fingers. I always knew you would. You were right, Mom, Lucia replied, blinking back tears. Just took a little longer than we expected. The best things usually do, Mrs. Williams said with the momentary clarity that sometimes pierced through her confusion. And this one, she turned to Jasmine. She reminds me of you. Same fire. As they left the care center, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a notification. The documentary about Lucia's journey and the systemic barriers facing women of color in mathematics had just been nominated for a national award. #JustTheLunchLady had evolved from a trending hashtag into a movement highlighting overlooked genius in unexpected places. Walking across campus the next morning, Jasmine breathed deeply, noticing how the comforting smell of chalk dust now felt like home to her, no longer stinging but familiar and full of possibility. The path ahead wasn't without obstacles. Mathematics remained a field dominated by faces unlike her own, but for the first time, she could see herself belonging there. When a reporter had asked Lucia last week if she harbored resentment for the years stolen from her career, her answer had gone viral. I'm not looking backward anymore. I'm too busy showing the next generation how to move forward. As Jasmine looked around the lecture hall, now filled with students from all backgrounds, furiously taking notes while the lunch lady unveiled the secrets of the universe, she realized that genius doesn't wait for permission to change the world. True brilliance can't be contained by others' limited perceptions. When we fight for recognition not just for ourselves but for all who come after us, we rewrite the equations that determine who belongs in the room. Hit subscribe to Beat Stories for more powerful tales of underdogs who refused to be defined by others' limited vision. Drop a comment sharing someone in your life who was underestimated until they changed everything. Your story matters too. Just the Lunch Lady.